This is a complete guide to all ghost hidden abilities. Now, a couple of things before we hop into it. Unless I specifically mention a ghost hunt sanity threshold, assume it's 50%. I bring up the topic of forced evidence a couple times. Basically what that means is that if you're playing with evidence, that ghost has to have that piece of evidence, which is more useful on difficulties like Nightmare or Insanity, where we only have 2 and 1 evidence. Like for example, Obake has forced UV. If you're on Nightmare and you don't have UV as one of your 2 evidences, you can cross off Obake. And final thing, in this footage, I am playing with 150 player speed and infinite sprint. This is just to ensure that I got the best footage possible of each ghost ability. So potentially don't try the kind of things I do in these videos in your own gameplay. If at any point you found this video helpful, please drop it a like. Maybe even subscribe for more Phasmophobia content. Otherwise, let's go and start with our first ghost. Banshees, like Dayan's, are another ghost that can only be female. So if you load into a contract and the ghost has a male name, you can immediately cross off Banshee. When you first start a contract, the Banshee will choose a target at random. This person is now their favorite player. When the Banshee goes to perform a short roam, they have a 67% chance of roaming to their target. However, they can only roam to their target if they're on the same floor as them. If the Banshee's target is hit by a sane ghost event, that person's sanity will drop by 15% instead of the typical 10%. Also, when Banshees go to perform dots, they'll choose to move towards their hunt target instead of other nearby players. When a Banshee goes to make a paranormal sound, there's a 33% chance it'll be one of its 20 screams. One of them sounding like this. If you want to hear all 20 different screams, you can check out the Phasmophobia wiki, which has them all listed there. The Banshee's hunt threshold is 50%. However, when it goes to hunt, it only checks its target's sanity. And when the Banshee does go to hunt, if its target is inside the house, that is the only player the Banshee will target during hunts. So if its hunt target is safely hiding in a closet, all other players are free to roam the map and will be completely ignored by the Banshee. However, if the target steps outside of the house, the Banshee will then hunt normally, meaning it's capable of targeting and killing any player. If the target happens to die, the Banshee will then choose a new target, which actually isn't random. She will actually choose the first alive player on the list, which is established by the order of which players loaded in. So you can check the player list to see who the next target will be. So testing for Banshee multiplayer can be relatively easy. Each person take a turn, probably with an incense, and see if the ghost goes for you. If at any point you're out there by yourself, everyone's in the house, and the ghost completely ignores you, then it's a Banshee. Now in single player, you have to test for Banshee a little bit differently. Since you're the only person in the game, you're of course the target, and once you've established where the ghost room is, go to the other side of the house with a motion sensor and maybe a parabolic mic to listen for the scream. If the ghost all of a sudden roams over to you, disturbs Salt, but doesn't give you an EMF reading, then it's most likely a Banshee. But it also doesn't hurt to confirm Banshee by hearing the scream. Banshees also have a higher chance of performing singing ghost events over other types of events. The Dayan, and yes, that's what I call her because I don't know how to actually pronounce it, so I just call her Dayan, is one of 2 ghosts that can only be female. So if you load into a game and the ghost has a male name, you can instantly cross off Dayan. Her hunt sanity threshold depends on how close the player is to her and in whether or not they're moving. If a player is within 10 meters of a Dayan and they're moving, the hunt sanity threshold is increased to 65%. However, if that player is standing still, then the threshold drops to 45%. If nobody's nearby her, she'll have a normal threshold of 50%. When a Dayan goes to hunt, her speed will depend on how close she is to a player and whether or not the player is moving. If she's 10 meters or further away from a player, she'll be normal speed. However, if she's 10 meters or closer to a player and that player is standing still, she'll be slow. But if that player starts moving, she'll be fast. And her speed can be affected through floors. So if she's 10 meters above you or 10 meters below you, if you're standing still or moving, her speed will be affected. The demon's typical hunting threshold is 70%. However, it has a rare ability to hunt at any percent sanity. So you could walk inside the house, a demon could choose to hunt, and then do so. However, they do respect setup timers, so you don't have to worry about using its ability during a setup timer. When cleansed by an incense, this will prevent a demon from hunting for at least 60 seconds, and demons only have a hunt cooldown of 20 seconds instead of the typical 25 seconds for every other ghost. The crucifix range against a demon is increased by 50%. So for a tier 1 crucifix, instead of it being 3 meters, it's 4.5. For a tier 2 crucifix, instead of it being 4 meters, it's 6 meters. And for a tier 3 crucifix, instead of 5 meters, it's 7.5 meters. And while they're only cleansed by an incense for 60 seconds and have a hunt cooldown of 20 seconds, they don't always respect these numbers. You could have a demon wait 3 minutes to hunt after cleansing them, or have a hunt cooldown of a minute plus. But these are the key ways to identify a demon, both the incense timer and the hunt cooldown. The Deogen, probably one of the most popular ghosts in Phasmophobia, has a sanity hunting threshold of 40%. It also has a unique spirit box response that I'll give you if you're within 1 meter of it. That sounds like this. When the Dio goes to hunt, it knows where you are at all times, so it is impossible to hide from this ghost. However, when Dios do go to hunt, they'll be extremely fast getting to you, but then very, very slow. So one of the easiest ghosts in the game to loop, but very unfortunate if you get found in a hiding spot without an incense. Dios are another ghost with force evidence being Spirit Box. So if you're on difficulty like Nightmare or Insanity, one of the evidence for the Dio has to be Spirit Box. The Gallu's hidden ability revolves around the use of incense, salt, or a crucifix. So when you first start a contract, the Gallu is normal. However, if it were to step through salt, or be cleansed by an incense, or use a crucifix, it would enter the enraged state. When a Gallu is enraged, it will not disturb salt. They will remain enraged until they hunt, and when they do go to hunt, they will sound slightly faster than normal. The crucifix range is also decreased when they're enraged, which can make a tier 3 crucifix basically as useful as a tier 1 crucifix. Whoa, okay. Their hunt sanity threshold also goes from 50% up to 60%. After Gallu hunts in the enraged state, it then enters the weakened state. When weakened, their hunt sanity threshold drops to 40%, and the effective range of the crucifix increases. When weakened, if a Gallu were to step through salt, be cleansed by an incense, or use a crucifix, it then go back to normal. Here are the Gallu's hunt sanity threshold, crucifix range, hunt-based speed, and incense blinding effect, depending on what state it's in. Here's an example of a Gallu that I had already enraged and was now weakened, and a demonstration of how it goes through all the stages. So it starts out weakened, walks through salt. There's a slight cooldown, by the way, when this happens. But it walks through salt and becomes normal speed. I put down another pile of salt, walks through it, slight cooldown, then enraged. I put down a third pile of salt to demonstrate that when a Gallu is enraged, they will not disturb salt. So yes, possible ways to test for Gallu when you first start a contract is to see if a ghost walks through a pile of salt. Wait a few seconds before you put down another pile of salt. If you 100% for sure know the ghost has walked through the pile of salt and not disturbed it, then it's a Gallu. Here's a similar example to the salt, except instead of salt, I'm using an incense. Now again, this Gallu's in the weakened state. They don't start weakened, they're normal, but I'd already enraged it, so it's weakened. But while I was hunting, I used an incense on it. After the blinding effect, it became normal speed. I used another incense. After the blinding effect, it became enraged, which would mean that the following hunt, it would be weakened. And just to know that if you enrage a Gallu during a hunt by getting it to walk through salt or cleansing it, it will then be weakened the next hunt. The Goryo has two main abilities. The first one being it will never change its favorite room. So if you have a ghost that clearly changes its favorite room, you can cross off Goryo. Now if you use the monkey paw and wish for sanity, which puts your sanity at 50%, and also causes the ghost to change your favorite room, then a Goryo will change their favorite room. But otherwise, they're happy to stay put. Their other ability revolves around dots. Goryo is another ghost with forced evidence being dots. So if you're playing on a difficulty like Nightmare or Insanity, and dots is not one of your pieces of evidence, you can cross off Goryo. Now Goryo dots are unique because you'll only see them through a video camera when you're outside of the room. So if you happen to see dots in person, you can cross off Goryo. Goryos are also only able to perform short roams, which means they'll never roam over 3 meters outside of their room. Now they can still vent farther than 3 meters outside of their room, but if you set up motion sensors and notice a ghost activate a motion sensor farther than 3 meters away from the room, then very likely not a Goryo. The Hantu's main ability revolves around how hot or cold a room is. They have a forced evidence of freezing, so if you're playing with evidence and freezing is not one of your pieces of evidence, you can cross off Hantu. When they go to hunt, their speed will depend on how hot or cold a room is. The warmer the room, the slower they'll be. The colder the room, the faster they'll be. Here's a graph of where their speeds will be at depending on what the temperature is. They're also another ghost that does not gradually speed up with line of sight, so whatever speed they are when you're looping them, they'll stay the same speed. However, if the room gets colder while you're looping them, then they will increase speed. If the breaker is off or broken, you'll be able to see the Hantu's breath. They're also the only ghost unable to turn on the breaker, so if you have a ghost turn on the breaker, you can cross off Hantu. The Jinn's hidden ability revolves around the breaker. In fact, if the breaker is broken or turned off, the Jinn basically has no ability, which also makes it the only ghost unable to turn off the breaker. So if you have a ghost turn off the breaker, then you can cross off Jinn. Jinns have two main abilities. The first one being that they can zap your sanity if you're in the same room as them. They'll zap your sanity by 25%, and if you happen to be close enough and you have an EMF reader on the breaker, this will also leave an EMF reading at the breaker. Their second ability has to do with speed. Jinns are normal speed, but if they get line of sight with you from a distance, they'll get an instant pep in their step. Mares hate the light. They're able to hunt at 60% sanity if they're in the dark, but have to wait until 40% sanity to hunt if they're in the light. They're the only ghost unable to turn on a light, and have an ability where they'll immediately turn off the light when a player's turned it on. So if you see a ghost turn on a light, you can cross off Mare. When the lights are currently on in its room, they have a 50% chance to perform a long roam. They're also more likely to do light-breaking ghost events. There's also a specific light flickering interaction that ghosts can do that will give you EMF reading at the light switch. Mares are unable to perform this. So if you get one of those light flickering interactions that give you an EMF reading at the light switch, you can cross off Mare. The Morai's hidden ability revolves around your sanity. If you get a spirit box response, a sound recording, or a parabolic response against Moroi, you'll then be cursed. What that means is that your sanity is now draining twice as fast, even if you're in the light. This curse can only be cleansed by taking a sanity pill. When the Moroi goes to hunt, its speed will be dependent on your average group sanity. Here are the numbers on how fast it will be depending on where your sanity's at, but basically at 0% sanity, it's going to sound pretty fast. A fun way to test for Moroi, if you have sanity pill restoration, is to sit in a closet, wait for it to hunt, and once it starts hunting, take a couple sanity pills. If you notice the ghost gradually slowing down after you took the sanity pills, then it's a Moroi. If you blind a Moroi with an incense during a hunt, it will be blinded for 7.5 seconds instead of the typical 5 seconds. It's very easy to identify a Moroi when using a tier 2 incense. As soon as the tier 2 incense finishes burning, pay attention to the ghost's speed. If the ghost stays slow for a couple seconds after the incense finishes burning, then it's Moroi. But if the speed picks back up as soon as the incense finishes burning, then it's not a Moroi. Ooh, almost didn't think I was going to smudge her there. Moroi is another ghost with force evidence, being Spirit Box. Mylings are the quietest ghosts of the game. You can only hear their footsteps when they're within 12 meters of you. So a common way to test for Myling is to put a flashlight at your feet in a hiding spot. If you hear the footsteps before your flashlight starts flickering, then it's not a Myling. But if you hear the footsteps as soon as your flashlight starts flickering, then it is a Myling. And this test is only accurate if you do it on the same floor as the ghost. You can also test for Myling with your walkie-talkie with a similar concept. Turn on your walkie-talkie, and if you hear the ghost footsteps before it starts staticking, then it's not a Myling. If you hear the footsteps as soon as your radio starts staticking, it is a Myling. When a ghost is hunting, if you hear the throws and not the toes, then it's probably a Myling. Now keep in mind, Raijus have an interference range on electronics of 15 meters, so a Raiju could potentially look like a Myling because it's affecting your equipment from farther away, but hopefully at that point you have electronics down, we'll notice its speed. If the ghost is faster on electronics, it's a Raiju and not a Myling. Another hidden ability of the Myling is that it's very talkative on the paramic. It's the only ghost that will give you 2 parabolic sounds within 80 seconds of each other. Obakes are the best ghosts in the game. Okay, I might be a little bit biased because they're my favorite, but they have a few different abilities. First off, they have UV as forced evidence. However, they only have a 75% chance of leaving a fingerprint when they touch a door, window, light switch, etc. So if you see a ghost touch a door once, there's no UV, maybe check one more door before you cross off UV. They also leave fewer footprints when walking through salt. They have a unique 6-fingered fingerprint and a unique double fingerprint that they can leave on light switches. When Obakes go to hunt, they will shapeshift ghost models. And they actually have set blinks that they will shapeshift on. And here are those numbers. The shapeshifts respect gender, so the male ghost models will only shapeshift between the different male ghost models, and the female ghost models will only shapeshift between the different female ghost models. Now there's 2 different ghost models, the crawling demon child and the pajama girl, that can change stances between different hunts. This does not mean it's an Obake. However, if they change stances in the same hunt, this is an Obake shapeshift. The Obambo has 2 different states. When you first start a contract, it'll be calm. After 1 minute of opening the front door, it'll switch into the aggressive state. After that, every 2 minutes, it'll swap back and forth between calm and aggressive. When the Obambo is in the calm state, it has a hunt sanity threshold of 10%. And if it were to go to hunt, it would sound slightly slower than normal. When it's in the aggressive state, it has a hunt sanity threshold of 65%, and if it were to hunt, it would sound slightly faster than normal. Also, if the Obambo enters the hunt in the aggressive state, that hunt will be 20% shorter. So for example, on a small map with high hunt duration, hunts are typically 30 seconds, but when the aggressive Obambo hunts, that hunt will then be 24 seconds. On medium maps, it's typically 50 seconds, the hunt will be 40 seconds, and on large maps, where hunts are typically 60 seconds, it would only be 48 seconds. The switch from calm and aggressive, and vice versa, can happen during a hunt, so if you happen to hear speed change during a hunt, it could potentially be an Obambo. Tips for identifying Obambo. When it goes to hunt, start a timer. If it sounds slightly faster than normal and the hunt is 20% shorter, then it's an Obambo. Alternatively, if you hear speed change during a hunt, from fast to slow or slow to fast, very likely an Obambo. Onis are one of the most visible ghosts when they go to hunt. They don't blink as often as other ghosts. Now, memorizing the Oni blink can be difficult, but what helped me was getting familiar with what a normal blink looked like. That way, when I saw a blink that looked different, it clicked in my head, oh, this is an Oni. Onis are a pretty easy ghost to cross off because they are unable to do an airball ghost event. So if you have a ghost that does this ghost event, you can cross off Oni. Also, Onis will drain your sanity by 20% instead of the typical 10% when they hit you with a ghost event. They typically prioritize more visible ghost events as opposed to shadow or translucent ones. Onryos hate fire. They typically have a hunt sanity threshold of 60%. However, if they're near a firelight, that drops to 40%. They have an ability where after blowing out 3 firelights, they'll initiate a hunt at any sanity. So one way to test for Onryo is to keep track of how many times the ghost has blown out the firelight. On the 3rd firelight extinguish, if the ghost hunts, then it could very likely be an Onryo. Now, a couple notes about this 3 firelight blowout and hunt ability for Onryo. If it blows out the 3rd firelight and there's a 4th firelight lit nearby, the 4th firelight will prevent this hunt. Also, Onryos are not able to initiate a hunt from blowing out the firelight if they're currently cleansed by an incense, or if there's a setup timer active. They're the only ghost able to blow out the same firelight twice within 20 seconds, and are also the only ghost able to extinguish a freshly lit firelight in under 30 seconds. Onryos are unable to hunt within 4 meters of a lit flame, so a typical way to test for an Onryo is to take a crucifix and put a firelight on it. Now, if you're using a tier 3 crucifix, which is a 5 meter range, you'll have to use more than 1 firelight, because again, the firelight only prevents an Onryo from hunting within 4 meters. If the ghost is able to use the crucifix without blowing out the firelight, then it's not an Onryo. However, if you have a ghost that is constantly blowing out the firelight and unable to use the crucifix, then it is an Onryo. Their frequency of blowing out firelight also increases the more dead players there are. Onryos are unable to light a firelight, so an easy way to cross off Onryo is if you see a ghost light a firelight or light a campfire. However, using the voodoo doll can force an Onryo to light a firelight. And these are firelight that are like in the house, like a candle. Ghosts aren't able to light your personal firelight. Phantoms have a couple different abilities, the first one being that they will disappear if you take a photo or video of them, including if you were to take a photo or video of them in the dot state. And if you were to take a photo of a phantom and you open up your journal, the picture would appear crystal clear. Being within 10 meters of phantom while in pseudo line of sight, so basically where you hear the heartbeat, will reduce your sanity by 0.5%. However, this only applies during events and hunts, but doesn't apply if you made the phantom invisible from taking a photo or video. They also have an ability where they'll pick a player at random and roam to you. When they do roam to you, they'll give you an EMF reading. When phantoms go to hunt, they are very, very difficult to see, and will have a very long blink. Poltergeists are little yeet demons. They have an ability where they can explode a pile of items. And if there's a player nearby when they do this, that player's sanity will drop by 2% per item thrown. Poltergeists are the only ghosts to be able to throw an item with the lights being on their room. That's because they're using their ability to do so. While hunting, every half second they will throw something, instead of the typical 50% chance of other ghosts being able to throw stuff. Not only will they throw stuff super frequently while hunting, but they also have very powerful throws. Usually my rule of thumb with trying to gauge whether or not a ghost is a pulty during a hunt is if I'm doubting it's a pulty, it's probably not. Because you actually loop a pulty and see how much they throw, it's a big difference. So a couple different ways to test for poltergeist is 1, you can make a few piles in the room and see if the ghost explodes those piles. Alternatively, look to see if the ghost is able to throw anything with the lights being on the room. Now be a little careful because sometimes ghosts can do things through the walls, but if you're 100% sure the ghost is in the room and they threw something and the lights on, then it's a poltergeist. Or put a pile of items at a looping spot and pay attention to how the ghost throws them. Raijus typically have a hunt threshold of 50%, unless they're by active electronics, in which that hunt threshold increases to 65%. They interfere with electronics at 15 meters instead of the typical 10 meters of other ghosts. And this is during events or hunts. So Raijus can sometimes be mistaken for yokais or even Mylings because they're affecting your equipment farther away. However, they get quicker around active electronics. So an easy way to test for Raiju is to put down an electronic like a motion sensor or just turn on an EMF reader. Listen to its speed whenever it walks by it. If it increases in speed when it gets by the electronic, then it's a Raiju. You can actually identify a Raiju before it ever hunts if it ghost events. Raijus currently have a super bass boosted heartbeat that sounds like this, which you'll hear during ghost events and during hunts. When a Revenant goes to hunt, they'll be extremely slow. However, if they were to detect a player via seeing them or sensing their equipment, they'll get very fast, go into the last known place of that player, and if they continue to see you, they'll stay fast. If you lose line of sight or cleanse them with an incense, they'll then slow back down, and stay slow if they no longer detect you. Shades are probably the most boring ghosts in the game, but that's just part of their ability. Their hunt sanity threshold is 35%, and they're unable to write in the book or blow out a firelight if you're in the same room as them. They're also unable to hunt if you're in the same room as them. So basically, if you're hanging out in the room with a shade, it's not going to do a whole lot. In fact, if you're using a voodoo doll while you're in the shade's room, it will not do a single interaction. Granted, it will still hunt if you push a heart pin, but every other pin will not cause interaction if you're in the same room. Now be slightly mindful of the being in the same room and the shade's doing things aspect. For example, a tier 3 crucifix covers a lot of area. In a place like the Tanglewood Foyer, a tier 3 crucifix is going to cover multiple rooms, so a shade could technically step into the bathroom and still use the crucifix if you're on the foyer. Same with firelight. If you're in the foyer, you have a firelight at your feet, a shade could then step into the bathroom or one of the bedrooms and still blow out the firelight. Shades are unable to throw items at you, whether this is outside of hunt or during a hunt, and they're also unable to do this Seeing Ghost event. So if you see a ghost throw something at you or do Seeing Ghost event, you can easily cross off Shade. They're also more likely to do airball ghost events and non-visible ghost events. It's not unheard of for them to do a visible ghost event, but if you have a ghost bombarding you with airballs, it could potentially be a Shade. Now, because of a Shade's introvertedness, it can be a little difficult getting evidence, but all you have to do is put everything in the room, step outside, and observe. With enough patience and encouragement, Shades will finally give you their evidence. Shades are also the only ghost to be able to do a shadow ghost event when you use the summoning circle, music box, or monkey paw to wish to see the ghost. Spirits have to wait 3 minutes to hunt after using incense on them, whereas most other ghosts have to wait 90 seconds. And that's it for Spirit. That's its only ability. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. These are the only ghosts in the game that ages. So when you first start a contract, they'll be young, meaning that they're able to hunt at 75% sanity, and if they were to hunt, they'd sound pretty fast. To age Thays, you have to be in the room with them. You can also age Thays during hunts if you're in the same room as them. And every minute or two, if somebody's nearby the Thaye, they'll age. And what this means is that their hunt sanity threshold drops by 6%, and they'll get slightly slower if they were to hunt. Which also means that if you were to sit on a Thaye for quite a while, if they were to hunt, they'd be extremely slow. A fun trick you can do with Thays at the beginning of contract, if you have a Ouija board, is to ask them their age. After aging them a couple times, ask the Ouija board again what their age is, and that age should have gone up. Thaye is another ghost that does not gradually speed up the line of sight, so when you're looping them, however fast they are, they will stay at that same speed. So one way to tell the difference between Thaye and maybe like a 0 sanity Moroi is to loop them and see if they get faster and faster. If they gradually get faster as they're chasing you, then Moroi. If they don't, then Thaye. After aging a Thaye 9 times, they are then unable to perform any ghost events, unless forced by cursed possession. The Mimic is one of the more interesting and possibly most frustrating ghosts in Phasmophobia. So technically, Mimic evidence is freezing, UV, and Spirit Box. However, they also have a hidden evidence being orbs. Mimic orbs aren't technically a part of their evidence, it's more of an ability. However, they will always have orbs. Since if you mark all the evidence that Mimic will give you, which is UV, Spirit Box, freezing, and orbs, you'll come up with no ghosts. So what does this mean depending on what difficulty you're on and what evidence you're going to get? So if you're on Professional or below, a Mimic will have 4 pieces of evidence. They'll have freezing, Spirit Box, UV, and orbs. If you're on Nightmare, where you only get 2 evidence, a Mimic will have a combination of 2 of freezing, Spirit Box, UV, and they'll also have orbs. On Insanity, they'll have 1 of the UV, freezing, Spirit Box, and they'll also have orbs. So to recap, on Professional, a Mimic will have 4 evidence. On Nightmare, they'll have 3 evidence, and on Insanity, they'll have 2 evidence. And of course, if you're playing on 0 evidence, a Mimic will always have orbs. They're the only ghost on 0 evidence to have evidence, being orbs. So if you're playing a game and you get any combination of freezing, Spirit Box, and UV, or orbs, freezing, Spirit Box, check for all those 4 pieces of evidence because you could have a Mimic. For example, the Onryo's evidence is freezing, Spirit Box, and orbs. Maybe on Professional and be like, okay, I got all 3 of my evidence, it's an Onryo. Well, technically, it could still be a Mimic. In that situation, you need to check for UV to be sure. Similarly, Hantu has evidence of orbs, freezing, and UV. Now, if you play on Professional, this could potentially be a Hantu, but to be safe, check for Spirit Box, because it could also be a Mimic. Now, if you get evidence like EMF, dots, or writing, that is not a piece of Mimic evidence, so you don't have to worry about potentially being mimicked. Now, as far as a Mimic's ability goes, they can basically copy any ghost ability in the game, with a few exceptions. So they can't copy evidence-based abilities that they don't have evidence for. So like, for example, they cannot copy Goryo dots because dots is not one of their pieces of evidence. If you're playing on Nightmare and your Mimic evidence is freezing, spirit box, and orbs, the Mimic would be unable to copy the Obake fingerprint because they're hiding UV as one of their evidences. Now, if you have a male ghost that is a Mimic, they cannot copy the Banshee and Dayan abilities. The Mimic has to be a female ghost in order to copy the Banshee and Dayan abilities. So I'm not going to go into a full list of every single thing they can do. It's much easier to say what they can't do. But some examples would be the Banshee Scream if the Mimic is a female, the Deogen Growl if you're on Professional, or if you're on Nightmare and Insanity and Spirit Box is one of the Mimic's evidence that they aren't hiding. They can mimic the speed of a Revenant. They can mimic the speed of a Deogen. They could have the blink of a Phantom and disappear in photos. The list goes on and on. The Mimic is unable to start copying ghosts until after 60 seconds of opening the front door. So what this means is if you're playing on a 0 standard, 0 evidence difficulty, or if you happen to get the ghost to hunt right away, within 60 seconds of opening the front door, a Mimic would be nothing obvious. Alternatively, if you get a ghost to hunt immediately and it is something obvious, you don't have to worry about Mimic. After the initial 60 seconds after opening the front door, Mimics will then start swapping between ghosts every 30 seconds to 2 minutes. Now they cannot change what ghost type they are during hunts or during ghost events. So you're not going to have a Deogen during a hunt that suddenly turns into a Rev. They have to stop hunting first before they swap. A fun way to identify Mimic is to look for contradictions. So like for example, in this game, this ghost is an airball ghost event. Onis aren't able to do airball ghost events. However, the next hunt, this ghost copied an Oni with the Oni blink. Another example could be you took a photo of the ghost, it doesn't disappear in the photo, but the next time it hunts, it has the blink of a Phantom. She is like a Phantom, so I'm gonna playfully just smudge. Wait, you're a Phantom? Wait, did she not disappear earlier when I... Wait, she's not a... Hold on, we gotta look for orbs. Oh my god, she's a Mimic. So while Mimic can seem like a frustrating ghost, just be mindful of the evidence that you're getting. If you get any combination of UV, freezing, spirit box, or orbs, check for that fourth piece of evidence. So if you have spirit box, freezing, orbs, check to see if you have UV. Also keep an eye out for any behavior changes. This could be speed, this could be the ghost's blinking pattern. Personally, the most fun way for me to identify Mimic is to see it all of a sudden become a completely different ghost. The twins, contrary to their name, are actually only one ghost. However, their ability allows them to do 2 interactions at one time, and when they go to hunt, they'll either sound slightly slower than normal or slightly faster than normal. While the twins are like most ghosts and have their own favorite room, because of their ability to do multiple interactions in different areas, it can seem like they're changing rooms or doing things in other parts of the house. In fact, when the twins go to hunt, if they're hunting as a fast twin, they will hunt from the last location where they did a longer range interaction. So if you notice a ghost doing stuff in a different room, or even hunting from a different location, and their speed is either slightly slower or slightly faster than normal, then very likely twins. Wraiths will never disturb Salt, whether it's during an event, during a hunt, or if they're just roaming around their room. They'll also have an ability where they can teleport to a player anywhere on the map, and when they do this, they'll give you an EMF 2 or EMF 5 if you're playing with evidence. Yokais are hard of hearing. In fact, they have to be within 2.5 meters of a player to detect their voice or active equipment. What this means is that you can hide behind a door or crouch behind a surface with your flashlight on, turn on your walkie-talkie, and the yokai won't hear you. They still see perfectly fine, so if they happen to accidentally path towards you or see you, they'll see you just fine, but they won't be able to detect your voice or equipment. They also have a chance to hunt early at 80% if there are players talking near it. Do you care that I am talking? Yahoo! Sir, I'm gonna need you to do a Thank you. Otherwise, the hunting threshold is normal at 50%. There's a super niche way to identify yokai with the music box. If you activate the music box, hold it, and crouch, if it's yokai, when the ghost event hits you, it will not trigger Curse Hunt, unlike other ghosts. However, if you're testing for yokai this way, I definitely recommend using a tier 3 crucifix to prevent the hunt, just in case it's not a yokai. The Yurei ability revolves around doors. In fact, the only interaction Yurei can do with the door is to fully open or fully close it. So it's actually a lot easier to cross off Yurei than to rule a ghost as a Yurei. Because if you see a ghost touch a door and slightly move it, then it's not a Yurei. Alternatively, if you see a ghost fully slam a door, you can't rule it as a Yurei because all ghosts are able to fully shut doors. I test for Yurei by shutting all the doors nearby, because it's very rare for ghosts to fully open the door, And if you see a door get fully opened, it's very likely a Yurei. Yureis are also the only ghosts to be able to fully open or fully close the front door outside of hunts or outside of ghost events. And when this happens, you'll get an EMF reading on the front door. There's a very rare situation where if you happen to have a mimic that's mimicking a Yurei, and they touch the front door, and you're playing with evidence, and one of the mimic's evidence is UV, you'll then have UV on the front door. But again, very rare situation. I personally have never seen it myself. When Yureis actually use their ability to fully open or fully shut a door, they'll drain your sanity by 15%. Now, every time they touch a door, it's not their ability. But when they actually trigger their ability, that'll drain your sanity. When you cleanse a Yurei with an incense, they're then trapped in the room for 90 seconds. Now, they can still vent outside the room, but as soon as the event's over, they'll go straight back to the room. Also, while Yurei is cleansed, they're unable to perform dots. So if you have a ghost that's cleansed, and they're able to perform dots, then it's not a Yurei.